What is love? I think from an evolutionary perspective, we would probably say it's a pair bonding device. In the ancestral environment, it was quite a harsh environment. There wasn't a welfare state. It was quite a dangerous environment. There wasn't medical care and things like that. So for children to survive in that kind of environment, they really needed the care of two parents. There was a pressure for parents to stay together until their children reached a certain age. And so love really functions as a bonding device. It keeps people together in order that they can raise children. So in terms of attraction, there's a lot to attraction. From an evolutionary perspective, we tend to think there are some universal rules about, say, what men and women find attractive. Now, when we say universal, we really don't mean that they apply to everyone. So there are general sort of rules about what women tend to prefer in a partner and what men tend to prefer in a partner. And they reflect the things that are important in the ancestral environment. So for example, women tend to place more emphasis in general on things like resources and status in a partner and the ability to provide and protect. And that's because women can only have a limited number of offspring due to the constraints of pregnancy and breastfeeding. On the other side, men could, in theory, have many offspring if they were really successful at attracting partners. And therefore, men tended to place more emphasis on things like physical attractiveness as an indicator of good genes, fertility, which is indicated by youth. But those are only really general rules, and what we see underlying that is a huge amount of variation within the sexes. What might be going on, for example, with, say, men who prefer older women, it's possible because of things like beauty products and cosmetic surgery and all of those kinds of things. Older women can look much younger than they are. It's possible that men are attracted to older women sometimes because they provide sexual experience. Looking at it from the other side, why would women sometimes prefer younger men? It's possible that the world has changed now. Women don't rely on men for resources as much as they used to. The change in status of women could potentially mean that women are more interested in good genes. So in terms of same-sex couples and mate preferences, there is less research that's been done on that. Some people have suggested that homosexual men might have similar mate preferences to heterosexual women, so that we see the kind of opposite. And some people have suggested that actually that's not the case, that homosexual men's mate preferences would be the same as heterosexual men's, and the same for women. But what there is does seem to suggest that homosexual mate preferences may not differ radically. There are also all kinds of factors that evolutionary psychologists are only just starting to look at. So for example, things like intelligence and humour, they actually indicate mate quality. So intelligence requires a highly functioning brain, which requires large parts of the human genome to be highly functional. And if you look at dating ads, for example, we often see, don't we, good sense of humour, and it requires making novel connections, it requires a high level of intelligence. If you have a think about what are the TV shows that have been most successful over the last few years? What are the films that are most successful? And often they emphasise characters with really dark personality traits. So there's a personality profile which is called the Dark Triad, and it's a combination of 3 dark personality traits. So narcissism, which is self-love, Machiavellianism, which is manipulative personality, and the darkest of all, which is psychopathy, which is a lack of guilt, a lack of empathy. Now, what we see often is that women do have a preference for men with this kind of personality profile, and that's quite difficult to understand from an evolutionary perspective. Why would we be choosing men who have these dark personality traits? Now, we don't fully have the answer to it, but one hypothesis about it is that maybe these men make good short-term partners. There is some evidence that sometimes women pursue something called a dual mating strategy, and that's where they might form a long-term relationship with a man who does have all of those caring, good partner traits, and then they may cuckold him with a short-term partner who has good genes. Whatever we think about that morally, sometimes that's a way genetically of getting the best of both worlds. Good genes from a short-term partner and investment from a long-term partner. Now, that's not to say that all women have done that over evolutionary time. That's definitely not the case, but it's probably a strategy that has sometimes been successful. Evolutionary psychology has been really successful in identifying these general patterns of mate preferences in men and women. But actually, if you were to ask your friends, you know, who's your ideal, who's your favourite celebrity, or have you had a weird crush, what you tend to find is some really interesting examples of that. So as an evolutionary psychologist, I find it really interesting that some of my mate preferences are completely not what an evolutionary psychologist would predict. So my ideal partner would be Philip Seymour Hoffman.